Welcome to another episode of the Next Generation podcast. Today, I have an episode for all of you stock show people out there, which I know a lot of our audience is. And so I am so excited to welcome Heather Welper on with me. If you are in the stock show industry, you know who Heather is, like, especially if you have Instagram or TikTok or any of the things. I'm sure you have either seen anything from her amazing outfits to stock shows to just their wild history and just impact that her and her husband are making within the stock show industry and all of the things like that. Heather, I am so excited for today's podcast. I am not going to ramble too much about your story. I would love it if you could just take it away, share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate all the flattery. That was like a wonderful little intro. Thank you. So I am Heather Welper. Like she said, that's my username on pretty much every social media platform. I guess a little bit like about me and how I kind of got where I am. I started showing in third grade, as you do, through 4-H, and then went on to FFA. I actually started showing pigs. I showed pigs for 2 years, hated it. But we had a guy, actually our sort of neighbor, if you live in the country, neighbors, but our neighbor raised show hogs. So he gave us one. And so we showed hogs for 2 years. And then in fourth grade, I started showing goats, which is actually how Calvin and I met. We showed goats at the same county and we're always very competitive against each other. Actually, fun fact, he's the only person who ever beat me in goat showmanship at our county. So he's the only one, which he loves to hang over my head. But yes, I showed goats, and then in 8th grade, I was gifted a black Angus heifer. Her name was Gertrude, and she was not much of a show heifer, but a local farmer in our area. He and his wife would, like once every so often, gift a heifer to a young individual that they felt like showed a good work ethic. I don't know why they did it, but I as well as another kid in my chapter were two that were able to get their heifers throughout my show career, and it was just really special. I hated her. I hated the cattle thing in general at first, which is so funny now, but she was just made my experience miserable. And I went on to scramble at Houston, and I ended up catching at Houston, and I got my first key heifer, which I did have success with. Actually, those the Houston trophies behind my head, those are from her. She was even worse. If you ever have shown a key, you probably know how their attitudes are. And then into my sophomore year, I got my first red Angus heifer, which truly made me fall in love with the cattle industry as a whole. I was all in on the goat side for as long as I could remember, and then I got that first red Angus, and I was like, I'm done with the goats. I'm all in on cattle. I got super involved in the Texas Junior Red Angus Association. I saw opportunity to just get involved and put myself out there, which is something, a girl like me being from a super, super small town that there's not a ton of opportunities. I got really excited about seeing the opportunities that were available through the Texas Junior Red Angus Association, and I just dove in. I was our queen for 2 years, which was my whole personality trait for a little while. Anybody that knew me until my sophomore year of college, they know. I had a bumper sticker on the back of my car that said Texas Red Angus or something, and so people always knew that it was Heather when I drove by. But I served as, I think, our secretary or something for a little bit, competed nationally, but that's really where my passion started and grew from. And then Calvin and I started dating when I was sophomore in college. He was always my number one crush. I always said I would marry him. He just took a little convincing. He was actually my fitter my senior year of high school and into a little bit of my open shows in college as well. So we always kind of had that thing, but we didn't officially start dating until then. And then we got married in May of 2019 and moved back to my hometown, actually on family land. And we've since just really dove into the raising and selling of show cattle. Calvin, I have finally brought him over to the heifer side. He is a big steer guy. I, not so much. I love the heifer thing, but the steer game, especially here in Texas, is a whole another ball game. If you know, then you just know. It's wild. But he's all in on the heifer thing now. We do both. His family out in West Texas raises most of the club calf Herefords that we have, so the show steer side of things. And they do have some purebreds, but we primarily do most of the purebred stuff at our operation here in North Texas. And this, well, we're in 2025 now, but in 2024, we welcomed our son, and we got him through adoption. We actually finalized in December. He's just been the best thing in the whole wide world, which kind of brings me, I guess, to how I got onto social media. I was the Instagram generation. I grew up when Instagram was kind of new, and we would do the follow for follow and shout out for shout out and all of those cringy little things that we used to do. But I always kind of had a little bit of a presence on Instagram. I wouldn't say it was anything. It's not. It was like I had like 3,000 followers as compared to like most people who had like 1,000, like normal people. And I always just loved social media. I like putting myself out there. I'm kind of an oversharer, so I just have always really liked it. And then when TikTok kind of started and COVID happened, we were in the depths of our infertility journey at that point. So we had just kind of started dealing with IVF and what that was going to look like. And all of my friends from college, we were all in like different stages of life and lived all over the state. So it was easier for me to upload videos about where we were in our journey because I'm a phone call girl and they are texting girls. And I was not going to text them that. Plus, just always having to bog people down with my infertility drama is just a lot. So I was like, I'll just make videos and it'll be fun. Well, with those videos, people would be like, I'm not trying to be insensitive, but where are your outfits from? So I kind of took that and ran with it. And then I started magnawaving in 2020. And that's really when my TikTok blew up. I think we went to, maybe it was 2021. I can't remember. The dates are all skewed now. We went to The Patriot, which was the show that when Fort Worth got canceled that year, the steer show. It was in Abilene and it was kind of the makeup. And I started posting Magnawave TikToks at that point, and it just like blew up. And ever since then, I was like, I guess I kind of have a niche on here. Nobody else was really posting stock show content consistently. At least it was like, one video here or there, and I really saw that I could grow because I knew I wanted growth on that app. I just didn't know how that would look. And so I just kind of dove off into the stock show TikTok, and it has opened so many doors and so many opportunities. And that's another thing I didn't talk about, but like my professional life, I am the production manager for Cultivate Agency. I graduated from Tarleton State University with a degree in Ag Comm in 2018, and I've been with Cultivate ever since. I also co-own a Magnawave business with my mom. It's called 3B Magnawave. I'm no longer super involved in that. Just having an infant, it makes it super, super difficult to travel all the time and be on the road, and it's just not where my heart is anymore. It served its purpose while we were, in that stage of life, but now that we're in a new stage, it's time to kind of move on from that, I guess. And so that's kind of like what I do, and now I've sort of started monetizing social media more to try to make that a way of income, and then of course we have all of our cattle. So that's me in a nutshell. I know that was kind of a lot, and that was a lot of different like off spurts of things, but that's kind of how I roll.
No, absolutely. And if you guys don't already follow Heather, you need to, because she truly is just like one of the people that is so relatable. And just posts the real content, the things of her life and things like that. And you really were kind of opening up a niche within the stock show side of agriculture, about sharing about your life and the ins and outs of the stock show world, which might not be a huge portion of agriculture, but we definitely are a loud portion.
Yes,
And just
absolutely.
like the portion that is in front of a lot of people a lot of the year and stuff like that. And definitely just took that and kind of ran with it. And I am just so excited to just dive into more of like your social media journey and just your journey in general. I would love to go a little bit more into just like going from a corporate, like you still obviously have your job full time, and then you're still doing like social media full time and just different things like that. Going from that to just like starting to share on social media and what that looked like, and going from sharing about your infertility journey, which is a really sensitive topic to share about, to kind of going into just more stock show things and stuff like that, especially now that you guys have your son, and openly sharing about your guys' adoption and just all the things like that.
So, like I said, I kind of started on TikTok, just posting, little things. And I've set a goal for myself every year on TikTok in terms of growth, because I am just a person that I have to measure my growth, which plays into my role as production manager at Cultivate, because it just makes sense with what I do. But I think the first year I was like, if I can just get to 10,000, I think that would be cool. And I've also always been one of those that's like, I think I'm very comfortable with being a micro, I guess, I hate the term influencer, but I guess that's what we're calling me. I guess I've always been fine with being a micro influencer, because I get nervous with hate. And it comes with having a big following. Anytime a video blows up, you're going to get it. So at first it was, I'm good with 10,000 followers. I'll just stay in my little bubble. And then the next year, I think I was like, well, I want to be at 20,000 by the end of the year. And I think last year when we were in Las Vegas for the NFR, which is always a really big content time for me, not necessarily stock show related, but fashion related. I was like, okay, I want to get to 40,000. If I can get to 50,000 in 2024, then I'm happy, and I think I'll stay there. Well, then, of course, 2024, my goal was 75,000, and I'm at 74 point something right now. So my goal is getting there, and then, of course, we'll see if TikTok is still a thing at the end of the year. But I'm starting to kind of try to post on the Instagram a little bit more than now, just in case it does go away, I can be there. But I am a very type A person. Like how I manage, I guess, my real job and then social media, and then with the MagnaWave that I did as well, I like to be busy. And especially when we were in the depths of infertility and all of the heartstring things that go with that, it's better for my mind to be super busy than to dwell and get into that kind of depressive anxiety mode, because that is something that I had struggled with in the past pretty hard, was depression and anxiety, and just not feeling like I had a place, I guess. Like I always felt like I wasn't having a true calling. Like I always felt like my true calling was to be a mom, and that for some reason it wasn't happening. And then I kind of found MagnaWave and like the whole TikTok thing, and I was like, well, maybe this is kind of what my place is supposed to be, what my calling is in life. And it maybe isn't necessarily supposed to be a mom, but it's maybe to be the stock show mom on social media for all these young girls who have questions. And I just kind of ran with that. And then, of course, I did end up getting to be a mom, which has been the biggest blessing. But I was able to find my calling through social media, which seems so silly, but it truly is. Like everybody always says, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. Well, like I love what I do as my full-time job. My job's a little boring. So, I mean, like I didn't want that to be all I did or all I was known for, was just crunching numbers behind a desk and making sure deadlines were met. Like I always felt like I had more to me than that. I love what I do, and I'm very thankful for my full-time job, but I just felt like there was more. And so with posting and growing a platform and a community that I have has just been amazing, because I have young girls reach out all the time, and they're like, I never, like, I didn't know what to wear in a show ring, and now I know. And I remember being that girl, because I did not come from a super big stock show family. My parents showed in high school, but not super competitively by any means. Like they would go to shows to get out of school type of thing. My mom is a barrel racer, so that's where her passion lies. And my dad just did it again to get out of school. So it wasn't like I came from this huge name family. And I remember being that little girl that was like I remember Sevens came out, because again, we were the Miss Me generation. And I remember going to a show my senior year and being like, what are all these girls wearing? And this was before like Google was really as accessible as it is. And I was like, what are these girls wearing? And I remember Googling jeans with sevens on the butt. And I finally figured out what 7 for All Mankind jeans were. But I'm like, there wasn't anybody telling us like, hey, this looks good in the ring, or this doesn't, or this is what's professional dress in the ring. Like we just had to go to these shows, hope that what we packed was good, and then go with it. Like it was so different than it is now. And I remember wanting somebody like that, but of course it just wasn't a thing back then. Like we didn't have these influencers and people showing us what to do like we do now. Like I don't even think the Pulse was a thing yet. Like, it was just so different. And so like I just have always wanted to be that resource for these young girls, and then it's just kind of taken off, which has been really, really awesome to see. Like, it's just been super rewarding, I guess.
Yeah, I love what you kind of talked about where you were saying that like you love your job. Like you find a lot of joy in that, but it kind of is boring and there's more that you want to leave within agriculture. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that a lot of that like they hear the whole scheme like whole thing of like love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, like that's not the reality for some people. And some people do love their job, but they feel a calling to more or they feel that like you said, you were like, I feel like I can make more of an impact in agriculture, or I feel like I can do more on top of this. And I don't want this to, like you said, be the only thing I'm known for. And I think a lot of people go through that, especially in a time where like identity crisis happens and you're like, this isn't the only thing I want to do with my life. Like, I want to be more, I want to do more, but what is more? What does that look like? And what just kind of is your advice for just like finding that area? I know for me, it was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of doing something and then being like, well, that isn't it. Well, at least I know that that's not what I want to do.
Yes, no, absolutely. And like you said, like you had that, like, it was, for me, it was a quarter life crisis. Like, I was 25. I had friends that were still in college, still doing the whole like party phase. I had friends that were having their first and second babies. Like, it was just that being mid 20s is and early and late 20s, a young professional, I guess, is so difficult just in general, not even as a professional in ag. Like, you just feel like you're being called so many different directions and hoping to figure out where you are. Like, the year I turned 25, I remember just being so upset. And like, I had nothing to show for it. Like, I was just like, we don't own a home. And I drive like not a super nice car and all these material things that like don't matter. And I'm not a mom and like all my friends, like, it was just so ridiculous. And so it was a huge time for personal development for me. And I really, like you said, just trial and error, like tried things out and figuring out who you are. Like, I know a lot of people say you do that, like, kind of when you're in college. And yes, to an extent, I think you do. But I really think that, like, 23 to 27 range is so important for who, especially as a woman, who you're going to be as like a true adult. Like, what are you going to do? And so I remember, like, okay, well, I didn't want to do the Magnum Wave thing. And my mom was like, Heather, just try it out and see how it goes. And that was the first time in my life that I really, truly felt like I was making an impact in the agriculture industry. Yes, my career is very ag focused. All of our clients are primarily ag based, but I'm very much a behind the scenes in my job. Like, nobody really knows who Heather Welper is at Cultivate. I stay and I do estimates and I do all the behind the scenes work. So, which is fine with me. But again, I like to be kind of, I guess, front and center. I would, if I didn't, I wouldn't be on social media. But I just didn't know, like, and I just knew I wanted more to leave a legacy, I guess, in the ag industry. Because you always, in the ag industry, people are so heavy on these people that have left a lasting mark and a legacy, and just these people who have done generational good and just all of these things. And I just wanted that so bad, but I didn't know even how to start. Because again, it's not like I had this huge family name or anything like that. And Calvin obviously feels the same way, but we were both like, well, how do we make this mark? And when I kind of started Magna Waving, no one was really doing it, and those that were doing weren't really talking about it. And so when I started putting it out there on social media, people were like, oh, I didn't even know this was an option. Like, this is so cool. I really like animal science type stuff. Like, I feel like this would be a really great avenue for me. And then I was helping the livestock as well. Like, I got to work on some super amazing cattle and pigs that went on to win major shows, which is insane. But yeah, it was the first time that I really felt that I was making a difference, and that people were taking me seriously. Like, men that were big dogs were asking me to Magna Wave their cattle, which I just thought was like, oh, they even know I exist. They were still mansplaining me how to Magna Wave their cattle, but I was doing it, and I was helping them succeed and helping them hang banners. And for the first time in my life, I was like, I have a place in this industry that's not just being Calvin Welper's wife or being on the sidelines. Like, I have a place. And so that was the first time that I really, it took, like you said, trial and error, just like finding my way through it. But once I kind of figured it out, now I'm kind of in that, okay, trying to find my way back out of it, because everywhere we go, it's like, hey, did you bring your Magnum wave machine? And I'm like, no, I brought my baby and all his stuff. So, no, I'm not lugging around that 30-pound machine and all of my stuff with it. I'm lugging around a 30-pound baby.
Unfortunately, that doesn't fit in the diaper bag.
No.
No, for sure. And I think that that is just a big testament to a lot of people within agriculture, especially like when you had a very similar journey growing up in agriculture and in the stock show world specifically that I did. Like I was on all the boards, I was a queen for a few years. I was involved. I did all the things. I did all the speeches, did all the traveling, all of this stuff, and then I graduated and I was like, "Oh, no one cares anymore. I don't like this wasn't my lasting impact. This was my stepping stone to leaving a lasting impact in agriculture, which was awesome. But there was a very, very reality check time where it was like, okay, like this was a stepping stone and I have to use this to get to the next spot. But then it's like, oh shoot, what's that next spot? And just trying to figure that out and going from being a very involved individual to just trying to figure it out of like, okay, where is my impact going to be in my adult life within agriculture? I'm not in the show ring anymore. What does this look like? And I think that, like you said earlier, you kind of have now found your niche in agriculture of, you know, being the show mom for a lot of kids that don't have that, whether it they're first generation show kids or whether they're just trying to figure it out and their parents showed, but you know, stuff's a lot different now or different things like that. Whether it be everything. And you know, some people might listen to this and be like, that's so minuscule talking about what to wear in the show ring. But guys, like, no, it's a real thing.
It matters.
And it matters. It's a big impact on a lot of different things. And you've kind of found, in a sense, a purpose doing that. Can you just share a little bit more about like that side of your life and what that kind of looks like and just different tips maybe there or stuff like that?
No, but first, I absolutely love what you said about how, like, when you graduated high school, it was like, oh, nobody cares anymore, because that reality check hit me hard too. I'm like, what do you
Yeah.
mean nobody cares? And I was the breadingest queen. Like, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And all my friends in college were like, it's not, Heather, nobody cares. And so then you have to start all over and who you are and
Yeah.
and set new goals. So I love that. And I think if you're a listener and you're in high school, like, just know you're gonna get to a point where you feel like, oh, okay, nobody cares that I did X, Y, and Z, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's still cool that you did it, but
yeah,
it's not in game. But no, I think like you said, I definitely do feel like right now I'm up for Sullivan's Best of the Barn on social, like a social media influencer, and I just think it's crazy, like, because you look at the list of the people that are up there. And I told Calvin last night, we were actually talking about it because Dadson Farms is up there. And I'm like, they're actually like, all of their videos are like them at stock shows. And they're constantly like showing all of the different sides and being a resource for pig people in the show industry. And just like, I mean, they've reached millions of people, like insane amounts of people, like people not even in the ag industry. And I told Calvin, I was like, I feel a little silly even being on the list because I'm over here just sharing like stock show outfits, hoping that it like hits the right page, or stock show vlogs or whatever. But I think there is such a place for every person that was on the list, because like you said, like, yeah, I'm sharing clothes and that seems so silly to people that are probably like, oh, she's just sharing. But I remember being a little girl and being like, I remember wearing my like fat babies into the ring and being like, oh, these are not cool anymore. Okay. So yeah. And I'm not saying that you can't have personal style in the ring by any means. Like, definitely find what you are comfortable in showing in and rock it. But there is like a trend to what we wear, and there's a reason why kids wear what they wear in the ring. And professionalism, it works with the livestock that they're showing. Like, I had a little girl that we sold a heifer to. Her mom reached out and was like, does she need a blazer for Fort Worth? And I'm like, well, her heifer's crazy, so probably not anything that can flap around. Let's not wear anything that flaps and make your heifer go even crazier than she is. And she's like, oh, good point. But like, those are just things that if you're not eat, sleeping, and breathing livestock show, you just don't know. Because you're like, oh, they're wearing a blazer is professional. Let's wear a blazer in the ring. And it's like, okay, well, let's think about why that's not a good idea with your calf. And then it makes sense. And I think, I mean, you're always going to get those people who are like, disagree with the things that you say, or they are always going to wear certain things because that's what their mom wore back in the day, or they can still win showmanship at their county show wearing XYZ. That's fine. No one's telling you not to, but I'm talking to the people who ask for my opinion and want it, because the people just don't know. And a lot of kids that, even in small schools, like I was the only kid in ERA that, which is where I went to high school, that showed cattle at the competitive level, like more than just our county. I was the only kid that went to majors. I had to haul with kids from Lindsay and Munster because that was it. Like we all loaded together and we went, and there was only like 3 of us from our whole county. So it's not like we were the norm. It's not like everybody at our school was wearing what people at stock shows wore. Like we didn't know what was really in until we got to the stock show. And I think a lot of kids are still like that. Like, yes, stock show seems like it's all our world, but it's very small comparatively, and it's very different than even rodeo fashion is. Like I always say, they wear cinch, we wear polo. They wear fringe, we wear ruffles. Like there's just differences. It's very similar, but it is very different.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I think that that goes into like just the testament of your social media journey and starting to share there, and just like you found an area that you were like, okay, like, hey, I'm going to all of these majors. I'm doing all this stuff. Like here's some tips and tricks. Here's just like the inside track, like all of these different things for a lot of people that otherwise might not know any better. And the reality of just like the stock show industry and agriculture is the fact that like if you didn't buy your animal from a breeder that is willing and able to help you and be that person that is hauling you to the shows and alongside you for all of the things and answering all of your questions, or if you didn't grow up in a family that is super competitive and into all of this stuff, then you probably don't know. Like you said, until you get there, or you just don't know any better because people aren't telling you any better, whether it be anything from what you're wearing to the reason that your calf isn't winning, or things like that. There's trends in the stock show industry, whether it be from the clothes that you're wearing to the cattle that we're choosing to win shows. It's all just a big ebb and flow as just the industry continues to evolve. And I think that just your social media journey is a big testament to all of that, just the ebb and flow and where it kind of goes. And you do kind of get some hate every once in a while from people of like, blah, 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 like all the horse hockey that people say that like it doesn't matter, yada, yada, yada. But you're being a voice for the stock show industry that doesn't have a huge voice within agriculture all the time. We're a pretty small percentage of a lot of stuff, but we are the people that the consumer public is seeing a lot more often. Like we are going to these stock shows like Houston, like Denver, like all of these places that maybe they have a rodeo, or maybe they have all of these other attractions that are bringing people in, and then they're walking through the stock show barn and they're the ones asking us questions, asking if they can pet our calf or different things like that, that we might not be a big portion of the industry, but we do see a lot of people and have just like a different area of influence and impact within just kind of like the whole atmosphere of just agriculture and stuff like that. I would love to just talk to people out there that maybe they're like having some identity crisis, want to like start sharing on social media, want to start sharing about their life, whether it be stock show or whether it just be something else in agriculture, just kind of finding what they like to share and being original, being unique, and just kind of like all of those sorts of things that you have to say there.
Well, I think there's room for everyone on the internet. I mean, I follow people that have are in the livestock industry and are super involved, to people who wear $30,000+ worth of jewelry, of gold jewelry at one time. I'm like, the possibilities are endless. But I think if you're, and I tell people this when they reach out and they're like, I want to be an influencer, I want like free stuff, and I want to get to do this and that. And I'm like, well, let's like set our goals first. Because again, I am very goal oriented, and I think setting measurable goals is super important in anything that you do, because you can see if you're succeeding or not. So first, like, why do you want to be an influencer? And like, are your priorities correct before you're going into it? Because if you're just going into it to get free stuff, people are going to know you're not being authentic. Like, my goal was not to monetize my social media when I started. My goal was to build relationships. And obviously when it was the infertility side, I was like, well, I want to make friends that are also going through infertility. And that opened doors to women in the ag industry that were like, oh, I am in the ag industry and we really don't talk about infertility. People just don't talk about this. It's very taboo. So thank you for talking about this. My husband gets so mad when I bring it up in front of a group of friends or whatever because it's just awkward. And I'm like, no, I got you. Like, so there's room for everybody, and there's always going to be a niche for you to grow in. And I think even in the stock show world, like it can't just be 5 people that are succeeding on social media. Like we need the influencers, but I think it's also important to be trained in a sense of social media. I was very fortunate. I was, like I said, I was at comm in college, so I took a lot of PR classes, which I think helped me tremendously. Like, yes, I get hate, but I know how to deal with that hate where I don't make it a PR nightmare, or I know how to post a vlog of Calvin and I doing things with our cattle to where it's not going to end up on the wrong side of social media, and that clips from that are not going to be taken out of context and used to hurt the social or to hurt the stock show industry. Like, I think just learning those things, and I think just being original to yourself. Like I've tried to be. I remember it was early on in my social media career, and I was like, I think Bama Rush was super popular at the time, and I was like, oh, I can be, because I am preppy and I like the glitz and the whatever, but I was like, oh, I could follow along with these girls. Like I could hang. I'm also like 25 at this time, and I'm like, why am I trying to hang with college girls, Heather? Like, and those videos flopped. They did not do well. But then when I started being original and being myself and posting who I am and just like posting the things that I genuinely like, then I didn't care if it blew up or not. Like if it does go good, great. And I think also it's important to remember that like as you gain traction and as you grow, you're going to get hate. People are going to have something to say, whether it's about your outfit or there's always people that know more than you, and they always love to put it out there that they know more than you. And like half the time you're like, okay, you're being ridiculous. This is why people don't want to join the stock show industry, because you're being so hateful. Like it's just things like that. You're gonna get that hate, but knowing that you are so comfortable in what you posted or so happy with the content that you're putting out there that you just don't care. Eventually the hate does like get you down. I'm very fortunate that I don't get a ton of it. And I think that's because I've built more of a community than just followers. And so I've been very lucky that if I do get hate, my followers and my community like have my back. But I think it's just important to know like you have to be 100% confident in the things that you're putting out there, because if it does turn around and people are being ugly to you, like how can you combat that? Like, okay, you don't like it, and that's totally fine, but I do. And this is my page, and I didn't ask for your opinion. So that's fine. What I really struggle with is like if somebody leaves hate on like one of the calves we raised or something, like that's hard because I'm like, okay, like let's not talk about it. Don't be mean. Like, this is a livelihood. But I think just like niching down, and you can play around with it. That's the whole thing in growth, and that's with anything. That's with if you're trying to find a career or trying to grow on social media or trying to just grow as a human, like trial and error. Like you said, it's okay to fail. Like failure is good for you. The more you fail, the more you know what direction to head in the right direction.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with that more. Like honestly, there was a point in my life where someone told me that they were like, "You know what? Sometimes in life I just look for the failures." Like I'm like, I am just striving to fail because you know what? The more I fail, the more I know like, hey, that's not the path I'm on and I'm closer to getting on the one I'm meant to. And you know, that maybe isn't my like piece of advice to leave to people of like go out and strive to fail.
Fail.
Um but there is like some really great content there of like the more you fail, the closer you are to finding the thing that is what you want to do.
And I think people
And
forget that too, because social
yeah,
media is such a highlight reel. We're not all showing our failures all the
yeah,
time. Like it's easy to delete a post if it
yeah,
flopped. Like you can just go in and delete that. Never happened. But
yeah.
like it's okay to fail. It happens. It happens to all of us.
Yeah, it happens to all of us and way more than you know. And I think a big part of my journey in figuring out where my realm of like passion was a lot of failing, a lot of starting businesses that did not end out working. But I don't think that at any point in my journey would I go back and not do any of the steps that I did, because every single one of those failures did teach me something. I know it's so cliche. It's so cliche to say that, but they did all teach me something. And without them, I might not have made a connection to XYZ that then got me this business deal that then told me, like, hey, go full time and like do all of these different things. And it's just like trusting the journey and the path that God has you on is a big part of like just my advice to people too, no matter what you're doing, whether you're trying to be a social media quote unquote influencer or just share your life, or whether you're just like trying to raise really good livestock, or you're trying to be an advocate for agriculture, like whatever that may be. Like, I think it's just not being afraid to fail, because we've all done it and we've all fallen flat on our face a lot of times, and
Absolutely.
it's just part of it.
And what's crazy is now, like, I thank God for the failures. Like, I thank God for the failures in our IVF, and I thank
Yeah.
God for the miscarriages that we did have, because now none of that we would not have our son without that. And we wouldn't have, like, there's multiple successes that we have now that came from really, really hard things, like really low times in our lives. But now we are success, and we have these high points because of those failures. And I, like, it's crazy that I think about that now, because I used to hear people say that, like, one day you'll be happy, you'll be glad that all this happened. And I'm like, you are crazy. There ain't no way I'm going to be happy about this. And it's not that it takes away that pain by any, or those hardships by any means, but like, once you get to a place where you can understand why you had to go through all those, it makes it so much clearer. You just have to get to that point. Like, even this time last year, I was like, I don't ever see a way out of this. Like, life's just one big failure. And then it wasn't. And that's just kind
Yeah.
of life in general. It sucks, and then it doesn't anymore. It's pretty great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that goes right into another thing that I kind of want to talk about a little bit more, is just your IVF journey and your journey of now having your beautiful and amazing son, and your guys' like official adoption and stuff like that. Like you said, it's not something that's talked about a whole lot within the agricultural industry. I think that it's one of those things that on social media, a lot more people are talking about it a lot more often. But just kind of the journey with that. And then also the struggles that you kind of talked about a little bit too, of like people being afraid to talk about it or share because the men are like, don't talk about that, or like, that's a private thing, or all of this stuff. But just not being afraid to, just that journey, and just some encouragement, because I know a lot of women out there are dealing with that, and just that phase of life that you guys are now kind of
Yeah.
on the joyous end of.
Well, and it's like not something I really get to talk about much anymore. So I'm happy to talk about it, because I think that was part of my purpose too. Was God gave me that struggle to help other people, and I always hated that. I'm like, well, why do I have to be somebody's help? Why can't I just be on the happy end? But I found out some news about a month before Calvin and I. Actually, it was the day before Valentine's Day, so it was 3 months before Calvin and I got married. It would likely make it difficult for us to conceive, and if we did conceive, we would likely lose it, given the news that we got. So I was distraught. I always knew I wanted to be a mother. I knew I'm an only child, and like I didn't care if I only had one, because sometimes only children are like, oh no, I want a big family. I'm like, I loved being an only child. It was great for me. But I was like, I at least want one, and Calvin was very on board with that. We didn't know that we wanted them right away, but given the news that we got, I was like, well, we have to start trying like as soon as we're married. So I actually got pregnant on our wedding night, which is insane. And I look back, and I was 23 when we got married, and I am like, oh my gosh, that is so young compared to 20. I'll be 29 this weekend, and I'm like, that was 6 years ago. I was such a baby. Like, it was so young. So we started trying. Anyways, I got pregnant on our wedding night. And I found out a month to the day after we got married that I was pregnant. And then I lost it about a month later. So our whole first year of marriage was just absolutely like the whole joy of getting to be newlyweds and happily married was gone, because I was so distraught. And like I said, I used to really suffer with anxiety and depression, and I was just in a really, really bad spot. And so the whole time I was like, well, I need to be pregnant again tomorrow. And just given some of the things that happened during that miscarriage, my body and hormones were just really off. And we struggled really hard. I remember we were going into Fort Worth, which starts in January, and we got married in May of 2019. So this would have been like January 2020. And I started like low dose fertility treatment type things. Nothing was working. I remember having to go back and forth from Fort Worth to our hometown to get my prescriptions, and it was just a mess because Calvin was like fitting like 20 head at a time at this point, and like he couldn't go back and forth, and I was stressed. It was like a whole thing. And so like I'm like, no wonder I didn't get pregnant. Like it was a basket case. And that didn't work. And of course, me being impatient, I was like, I'm done with the like half-assed treatments. If I'm going to do anything, I'm going to dive in head first. So I sought out a new doctor. He was actually an IVF doctor, but he was like, well, we'll try X, Y, and Z. I don't really think y'all will need IVF. So we tried all of these things all the way through 2020. And of course, that was when COVID hit. So that kind of like pushed us back with certain things. We did the IUIs, we did all the things, nothing worked. And he wasn't listening. I felt like that doctor wasn't listening, because if there's one thing about Heather Welper, she's going to do her research. And I could pretty much have a PhD in infertility at this point. I feel like Calvin's like, Heather, Dr. Google is not helpful. Like, you really don't have a PhD. And I'm like, but I basically do at this point. And so I did all this research, and I just felt like he wasn't listening. So I found a new doctor. Well, then we're still into COVID, obviously. And this doctor's like, I think you have X, Y, and Z wrong with you. So I had endometriosis on top of everything else. And he's like, I would really like to do a surgery to see how extensive your endometriosis is and check out your anatomy to see things. And I was like, okay. So we do the first endo surgery, which is a laparoscopic surgery. And he's like, your endo is horrible. Like, it is like a 4th degree endometriosis. It's covering your uterus, it's covering your bowels, it's covering your bladder. We really need to go in and remove what we can, but for us to remove it around your colon and everything, we have to give you a colonoscopy to make sure that if we nick anything, you're not going to like die on the table. And I'm like, oh, great. So I think that was in like November or December. And then I turned around and had a colonoscopy and then had another laparoscopic surgery. Everything was removed. They were like, oh, I don't think we're going to have any issues now. Like, I think we're good to go. And I was like, okay, like, great. So we try again for probably like 6 more months. Nothing's working. And he's like, Heather, it's time to move on. Like, I think it's time. And so at this point it was, I think 2022. I only had one natural pregnancy, even with all the fertility medications we did. And I was like, okay. So we moved on to IVF, which is something I never really felt like fit with us, I guess. But at the time I felt called to, and we did IVF. Again, they're like, oh, nothing's wrong. You're going to get pregnant like this. Y'all are going to have all these embryos. Like, it's going to be perfect. Well, we get 3 embryos, I think. The first one didn't stick. Again, I didn't feel like the doctor was listening to me. So then the second transfer we did stick, but it was a chemical pregnancy. So, which just essentially means like you lose it within like a week of finding out you're pregnant type thing before a sonogram. And then we transferred our third, again, didn't work. So at this point I'm like, okay, like I just am done. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm just done. We'll try naturally, but I'm just done. Well, as soon as I made that decision, I got pregnant naturally. Again, another chemical pregnancy. And then 2 months later, I believe, I get pregnant again. I actually found out like the day after my grandpa's funeral, and that pregnancy lasted almost 10 weeks, which is the furthest I had ever made it, this whole thing. And then we go to like my last ultrasound, and the baby's heart has stopped beating. And so we move forward with how you need to do that without getting into too much. And I ended up having, when it was all said and done, my doctor horrendously failed me, and I almost went septic. I had to have an emergency C-section to remove a 10-week fetus 6 weeks after I had already lost. So it had been living in me, or it was inside of me, for 6 weeks after I had already lost it. So like, he did my blood work, and he's like, you're almost septic. Like, we got to get this thing out of you. Like, it was a whole thing. So after that, and all of the trauma of the 5 years that it took to do all that, it's just craziness. I was like, you know what, I'm just done. Like, I feel like this is God telling me, like, maybe motherhood is not in your cards. And I feel like I should say, Calvin has always had a heart for adoption. Like, he has always said from the time that we got our first diagnosis of, hey, it may be hard for y'all to have kids, he has said, we will adopt. Like, you know the scene in So Magnolias where he's like, we'll just buy them if we have to, shall we? Like, now looking back, that's awfully traumatic. Like, you can't say those things. But he quoted that, and I was like, okay, you're a good man. So we just kind of hung up the towel, and I was like, you know what, I'm done. And then I was like, I don't know what hit me. I was like, you know what, maybe adoption's not like that far away, but I want it to be ethical. I want it to be child focused because a lot of it is not. And I was like, I want to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons and that I'm healed from my issues and that we can move forward. So I talked to some people that I knew who had adopted, and I did some research, some social media friends, reached out to them that had adopted, and just all of these things. And they kind of informed me on the trauma in adoption and why doing it certain ways is probably not the best way to do things for the child and whatever. So I just prayed. And then if you go through an agency, which depending on your state laws, some you have to, it's like $40,000 just for the agency, just to work with the agency. Well, we had already spent that much on IVF and everything, so we're like tapped out at this point. Plus, we're building our home, and I'm just like, okay, like we're out of money, so it's just gonna have to fall into our lap. So I remember praying, and I was like, God, if this is truly your calling for me to adopt, it's gonna have to fall into my lap. Like I'm done searching, I'm done fighting, like I'm done. Well, like 8 days later, my mom is doing my hair. She's a hairdresser, and I was telling her about this. I was like, I just think maybe like if the time came, I could adopt. Like if it was the perfect situation, I could do it. Like if a kid really needed me, I could do it. She's like, well, that's funny that you say that because one of my clients was in the other day and said, told her this story about this lady who was pregnant again. Well, it turns out her daughter had adopted um, one of the Crew's biological sister from that, and but they were in their 50s and they're like, we can't adopt again, like we can't do it, we don't know like the trauma that they'll be born with, like we don't know, we just can't do it again, but they need a good home. And so at this point me and Calvin are like, oh, well, we'll take the call. So we get the call and they just explain everything, and we're like, I mean, if it's meant to be, we can handle it. Like it was crazy things that were said on this call, like things like in a movie, and you're like, well, if it works, it works. If not, whatever. And they're like, I'm not trying to scare you. And I'm like, you're not going to scare us. We've been through the depths. And so we just go along with it. And then things started working out. And we meet Crew's grandma and great grandma. And they loved us and we loved them. And we got to know his older siblings and like all of this stuff. And it was just great. And there's a lot to this story that I will not share, and out of respect for both Crew and his biological family. Like, but I knew that it was a situation where he needed us and like it would just be best for everybody. So it happened, and then he was born and he was perfectly healthy, and it was just the perfect situation. It was, you could truly see God in all of everything. And he came home from the hospital. He went to his great grandma's for a little bit, and then I think 3 days after that, or two maybe, he got to come home to us, and he's been with us ever since. And then it was a fight, but we finally got to finalize in December, so, and his birthday was in February, so 10 months later, and it's just been, I know that's a long journey, but that's like 5.5 years condensed for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really, really sweet, and it's been a journey for sure. It was really deep there for a while, and I always just hoped that I could like be the mom that I had hoped I would, and I think for Crew I definitely have, and it's been really, really good. Like I never knew that adoption was something I wanted to pursue, because again, like I didn't know that I would be able to be selfless enough to do it for the right reasons. But then whenever you meet the baby, it's like it works out. So, and you're just like, I can't imagine doing it any other way. And I'm so thankful for those 5.5 years of horrible, awful tears and sadness and wanting to not wake up the next morning. And now it's like, I can't wait to wake up.
Yeah. What's some advice that you have just for maybe people that are going through this right now? They're in the depths right now, or they're just maybe even opening their hearts to the possibility of adoption or just different things like that. You're so open with your story, and thank you so much just for your just genuine heart behind all of this and your willingness to share. But yeah, what's just some of your advice or thoughts there?
I think just like lean into, if you are religious or faithful, lean into that, lean into your husband, like really make decisions together, because like again, I'm very headstrong. I'm gonna make the decisions that I'm gonna make. Like I'm just the way I am. And I wish sometimes I would have just taken a step back and looked at the big picture, because when you're in it is, and when you're in the whole TTC, which is trying to conceive journey, if everything is week based, because that's how the woman's cycle is. So every week you're like looking for something to look forward to, and then every month you're looking. So if I could go back, I would just like, I guess my advice is to just live in the right now. Stop living for, oh, in 10 days I get to take a pregnancy test. Oh, in 2 weeks I'm going to ovulate. Like, quit living for that and live for the now, because I missed out on so many happy things because I was so worried about getting pregnant. And the year that we lost our first baby, I was in so many weddings, and I got like all of my best friends were getting married, and it was just such a joyous time for all these people in my life. And I was a Debbie Downer. And I remember, like, their bachelorette parties, I remember thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to get pregnant this month because I'm ovulating and I'm at a bachelorette party in New Orleans. Like, don't be that person. It's okay. Like, it is okay to take a month off. It's okay to live in the now. Like, your journey's already mapped out for you. So you stressing about the fact that it's not going to happen this month, it's not going to help. Like, and I hated to hear that in the then, because it is just so heavy. But I guess my biggest whole advice is just find somebody who you can talk to and relate to. And if you are that person, if you're like, none of my friends were infertile. It was just me. And so I had nobody that really understood. And the best thing my friends ever did for me was say, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here for you. You can talk and say whatever you need to say, but I don't know how to help you. And that's all I needed. Like, don't be that friend that is going to constantly give advice, because that's not helpful. Like, oh, Mucinex. No, like, don't do that. Don't be that friend. Maybe just be like, hey, well, I'm here for you. You need some coffee? You want to go do whatever? Like, and just have, I guess this is more advice for if you know somebody dealing with this, just have grace for them, because it's really, really hard in the moment. And I'm very thankful for the friends that I do have, if y'all are listening, that had grace with me in that time, because I know that I rained on y'all's parade a couple times, way more than I would have liked to. And so thanks for that, friends. But I guess that's just kind of my advice, is try to, as much as you can, live in the moment, and don't be afraid. Like, though, there's some of us that are putting our voice out there so y'all can feel like you can reach out. Like, when I was in the journey, I was like, hey, reach out to me. I'm fine with that. Now that I'm not, and I think there's like ebbs and tides with that too. Like, now that I'm not in there, I've kind of blocked a lot of that part of my life out, and it's not wounds that I've healed from them, and it's not wounds I want to reopen. So I've had to tell people, like, hey, I'm not that person anymore that can be your shoulder. Like, I can't go back to that place, because I've healed from it, and I can't just keep living it. Like, I can be there for you, but I can't keep living it. And I think that's important too, is to know your boundaries and to set them and do what you need to do. Be selfish in that area, because nobody's being selfish for you.
Yeah, I think that is just such amazing advice for that time in life and everything like that. And I have never walked through those shoes myself, but I know people that have, and it is a terrifying time, a stressful time, and no matter what anyone says, it's not going to help the situation. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be unsolicited advice. Like, I don't care if you tell me that the sun is shining today, it probably wasn't going to help my friends that were going through that day. And I think that that's just the reality of just a really, really hard and really crappy situation. But you guys have such a happy ending to that really crappy situation, that just like all of those trials and everything like that. When did you kind of know that your heart was ready for adoption, and just that path? Maybe someone's not going through infertility, but they're like, hey, I think I might have a heart for adoption. What kind of advice do you have there, or just thoughts there?
To decide that, I mean, like, I always kind of in the back of my mind, like, was like, well, what if we did have to adopt, like, and I hate to think of it like, what if we had to? Like, it's more of a got to, really. But like, when you're in it, you're like, people are always like, why don't you just adopt? And there is no just in anything. Like, there ain't no just in adoption. It is hard. Like, it is hard. But my advice, even if you're not in the infertility community, you just want to adopt, I think the most important thing is to make it child-centered. And there's a ton of good resources out there. You just kind of have to research and find like what you're looking for. And everybody's journey is going to look different for adoption. Like, we went into ours thinking we were going to have to be a evictive kin placement through foster care. which if you don't know what that means, you can Google it. But just be willing and be prepared to do your research and find what fits you the best. And like with anything, another reason I don't post a ton about our adoption is because of the hate that is on social media regarding adoption, because it is a questionable, I don't know, industry as a whole. Like there's a lot of bad apples in it, but I don't think that should take away from the good that can come from it if you're willing to do your own research and learn and truly do what is best for the child in that situation. So I think if that's kind of where you're leaning, like look into the different avenues that there are, because every state is different. Every state's laws on it are different. Every like county is even like our county. If we were going to just do a foster situation, there are like our county is, and the county neighboring is horrible with the amount of children in the system. Like it is huge. But I think also with that, you have to make sure your heart and your mind are ready for what can come with that, because it's deep. There's a lot of really deep things. And it's not something that it can be taken lightly. Like without getting too into anything, like there's a lot of bad things in this world. And I think you have to be prepared for that if that's the route you're willing to go. Like you may not get your cookie cutter baby. Like you may not get the perfect little ideal of what you have, and that we were prepared for whatever came, like what was going to happen. We didn't know if he was going to be healthy. We didn't know. And I think that's like you as the adoptive parents need to decide like what that looks like for you. And just do your research and make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, that if you need therapy to deal with it, like that you do that. And that you just make sure that you are in the best place to be the best parent for that child. Because again, it all should go back to the child. You should not be like the reason that this is happening. It should be for the kid, because it should be child focused. That's my biggest thing with it all. It should be child focused. It should be the best thing for the child.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Heather, thank you for your openness about just such a deep and such a hard topic for a lot of people to talk about. I think that that's a big step, especially in the agricultural community for a lot of people, is just normalizing talking about it.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people that we interact with every single day that are walking through their own versions of Heather's journey. I know I can count on multiple hands the amount of women in my life that I'm close with that are walking through some version of that journey. And so just being open and willing to talk about it, even if it's uncomfy, and all the things. And just Heather, thank you for your openness and willingness to share. Just
And
a
don't
really
ask
hard
people when they're
part.
having babies.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Amen to that. As a person who was recently married and all of the things, and
That's the worst.
people love to ask that
Always.
question. And thankfully we have some really amazing like parents and stuff that they don't hound us about it one bit. But I know that there are a lot of people who aren't blessed with that, or have extended family who you were just sitting through Christmas or sitting through the New Year with them and had to come up with your creative responses of like, oh, hey, when was your last bowel movement, Karen? Would you like to tell me about that?
Yeah.
If you're going to ask me that question.
We're going to get into this? Like, okay.
You want to open this can of worms? Let's go.
Yeah, bring it
Let's
on.
tango. Yeah, no, absolutely. Just, yeah, thank you for all of your advice there and willingness to open up and all of those different things. I know we talked about a lot of different things today, but as we start to round out this podcast, I would love to wrap it up and hear what your piece of advice is that you have for the next generation of agriculture.
I would say get involved where you can. I think this industry is, like it's been said a billion times, it's like 80% in who you know, 20% in what you know. So obviously, always be learning. That's important. But always be willing to network. Always be willing to put yourself out there and just like hustle. Like put yourself out there, do the internships, take the job that may not be the best fit, but you never know what can come from things. I took internships that I thought were going to be my career path, and I was like, oh, okay, that's not where I'm supposed to be. And it's funny how life, you end up where you are supposed to be regardless. Like it may not seem like it in the moment. Like you may be like, "Ugh," like we said, you just keep failing. Failures are for a reason. Eventually, you'll be thankful for those failures, because in those internships that I failed, I would cry. And now I'm like, well, thank God they failed. Because can you imagine? I have friends that would have taken the job, but I'm like, they weren't happy in that job. So there's like, just put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to fail. Network, always make a good impression, and build your resume. Building your resume is huge. Like, building your network is huge. I am a huge proponent of it's all in who you know, because that's how I have my career. That's how I have made some of the accolades that I have. Like, that's how I've ended up where I am. And so just push yourself, and you don't have to come from the big name. You don't have to be the seventh generation agriculturalist, cattle raiser, stock show extraordinaire. You can be the first generation and you can make it happen. It's hard and it's expensive, but you can do it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Heather, thank you so much for just your time today. That amazing chunk of advice that I know I needed to hear myself today, and just all of the things. Thank you so much to everyone listening. I will have every single one of Heather's links linked down below. So make sure, if you're not already following her, you go give her a follow. Go check out her page if you have any other questions, whether it be career stuff, which Heather does talk about quite a bit. I know we didn't talk about that a lot on this podcast, but she does talk about that quite a bit. Whether you just want some really awesome fashion advice or whatever it may be, just make sure you go give her a follow. Go check out all of those links down below. And again, Heather, thank you for coming on to the Next Generation podcast. And to all of you listeners out there, we will see you all next week on another episode. We'll see ya.